Welcome to Shallow. Join us as we explore the topics that are always on our minds. From beauty and wellness trends to balancing our careers and ambitions. These conversations fill our WhatsApp inboxes and social media feeds. We're diving into pop culture and asking the question, is it really that deep?
In this episode of Shallow, we're diving into the complex and often painful experience of friendship breakups. While we hear plenty about romantic relationships ending, losing a close friend can be just as heartbreaking. We'll explore the different reasons friendships end, the emotional impact of these breakups, and how people navigate the healing process. Let's dive in. Hi Phoebe, how are we doing today?
Lucy, I'm good. I actually have a relevant recommendation for us today, one that you actually bought me. Thank you so much for that. It's a book, it's by Elizabeth Day. It's called Friendaholic: Confessions of a Friendship Addict. And I think after recording our ghosting episode, it got us chatting about friendships and friendship breakups, and I think this book is super relevant. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but it's basically surrounding about our tendency to really elevate romantic love, but we often forget about friendships, and they're even more important a lot of the time, and why it's so hard for us to find the right words to express what these bonds mean to us, basically.
Yeah, and I think, we're going to dive into this episode and talk about whether it is actually that deep or not, but when a friendship ends, there isn't the same kind of expectation of the grief period, I guess, that you have with relationships ending. If you have a relationship that ends, you go to a friend and they'll be like, take things easy. A lot of all the kind of self-help books and information out there is you'll go through a few phases of anger, similar to kind of losing somebody to death in a way. It's like, you're going to go through these emotions. You've got to kind of ride it out. And when a friendship ends, or you don't stop being friends with somebody, I don't think we hold the same torch up for that.
For sure. I think the space we kind of, or the vernacular we have for romantic relationships or romantic breakups versus where we are with friendships, there's definitely a lot of grey space in between them. And I think when I was just reading the blurb of that book, I do really relate to what she's saying. A lot of the time, these friendships have meant an equal amount, if not more to me, than a romantic relationship at a given time.
Yeah, and I think just calling back to the kind of anecdote we spoke about at the beginning of the ghosting episode, which was we were watching, these 5 or 6 girls on a surfboard, like playing around in the sea, and they must have only been like maybe 12, 13 years old, and it was kind of like the cogs were turning of like, will they all be friends in 10 years time? Probably not. Like maybe they will know of each other. Maybe 1 or 2 will have kept in touch. But naturally, as we grow up, our friendship circles decrease in size. And, I do think there is a good reason for it. And I think in that book that you're reading at the moment, they say something like the sweet spot for the amount of close friends you should have is between 4 and 5.
Yeah. And then anything over that, basically it's diminishing return, so it can actually make you sadder if you have more friends, because you feel like you have to spread yourself too thin, or you're saying yes to everything and then you're neglecting your own self-worth.
So in a way, friendship breakups is a part of life, and it's something that happens to everybody, because in primary school to secondary school, high school, college, university, you gain friends, you lose friends, you change friendship groups, you move to different cities, friendships come and go and they end in different ways, and we don't talk about them in the same way that we talk about relationships ending. You always remember when your friend's broken up with their boyfriend, but you don't really remember when your friend's maybe broken up with their best friend, or like they don't speak to their best friend that they had known since primary school. And it is a very, very normal part of life, but there is ways to do it, I guess.
Definitely. I think that's a really nice, I was going to use your line, segue.
We love the word
we
segue.
Love a segue.
We love a segue. I actually need a new word. What could my new word be? What is another word for segue?
Thesaurus segue.
Cinnamons? How do you say that?
A synonym?
Yeah, segue synonym. Personal transporter.
All right, we've pulled up. Okay,
balancing scooter.
What? This feels... Oh, you're talking about the other segue.
They're not...
That's a different... while you figure that out, there was an article we came across while researching by Dr. Ariana Brandolini in Forbes titled "My TikTok on Friendship Breakups Went Viral. Here's what we can all learn." And basically, in the TikTok, she is playing out a double-sided skit of how she would end a friendship. And before we get into the comments, which were passionate, I just want to read you this quote from the article, which says, "Research shows that up to 70% of close friendships and 52% of our social networks dissolve after 7 years. Yet, when we consider friendships, we rarely think of them as finite. Our collective paradigm is that they are meant to last indefinitely because of the idea of friendship is extremely broad and nebulous. We use the word friend to describe everyone from a co-worker to our best friend since we were in kindergarten. Despite their common occurrence, we rarely see friendship breakups portrayed in the media, nor do we often talk about it playing out in real life," which goes kind of directly back to what you were saying, which is regardless of your age, child, teenager, 20s, upwards, this is happening all the time, and we don't often see it in film, TV, media, and we don't often talk about it either.
No, and I think it kind of develops as you get older as well, because it depends how long you've known the person, I think, as well. If you've known them maybe a year or under a year, the phasing out of that friendship could be a lot less impactful than one that maybe you've known for 10 years and, you know, suddenly you're feeling like your life is not aligning anymore and you're going in different paths, and it's navigating those different lengths of relationships, basically.
Definitely. And who you maybe owe a conversation to and who you don't, kind of calling back to the ghosting episode of like, do you even owe that person a conversation, full stop? I think it is a layered, nuanced discussion. It really depends on maybe length of friendship. Have you had an argument? Is there stuff that needs disentangling? But I think that there is no playbook, whereas when you're in a romantic relationship, there's a breakup, right? It's ended.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to talk about the TikTok, because I think in the TikTok, she's kind of playing out this narrative of the friend asking why the other friend's not speaking to them anymore, and they're kind of saying, you know, I'm just being honest with you, I don't have a place for you anymore, I think we're going in different directions, and blah, 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 blah. And it's to me, it was a very robotic video, and I don't think it was a very blanket video either. Like, I don't think you could take that advice and just apply it to every friendship that you've had, because let's say it's a friend of a friend that you've just kind of started hanging out with, and maybe you're thinking maybe we don't have much in common, but maybe they keep asking you to go out with them and you're just kind of thinking, I don't really want to, not for me. For me, it feels a little bit extreme if that person was like, oh yeah, do you not want to hang out with me? For them, me to be like this whole narrative of, oh, I just don't think we're working out, I don't think we're right for one another, blah. I just don't think it's that deep. I don't think you need to do that. I think that's a little bit excessive, and you'd probably come across as a little bit weird.
Yeah,
like, you're a bit too deep, man. Like, I don't know why.
Yeah, for sure. I think if it's, as you described, that kind of situation, or maybe a friend of a friend or someone who's on your peripheral, then you might be a bit strange. And I think you can't also really lift that script, because if you were on the receiving end of that, probably a lot of people's response would be like, all right, tell me what I've done. Like, what's the problem? Like, I think copying, pasting that is probably a little bit impossible. I think some people in the comments were really a bit outraged, weren't they? It was a lot of, this is actually more hurtful, just let it fade slowly. Is this actually how you end a friendship? Like, this feels savage. I think I'm in the camp of ideal world, maybe I just need closure as a person. If I received that conversation without any lead up, I would be like, whoa,
what's going on?
Yeah, like, I've had no inclination that this was going to happen. There hasn't been an argument. Like, in my ends, we're all gravy. That would really throw me off. I think if I'd had a bit of a like, okay, we're obviously not on the best footing, I think I probably am in the camp of...
Yeah, I feel like if you've had multiple stages where you're kind of discussing your friendship, or you've kind of maybe been having a few arguments, or you've not been agreeing on particular things, and you're kind of... I feel like as a human being, you can pick up on kind of body language and, you know, in-person social reactions and things like that. And yeah, I think it would be a very... From what this TikTok is, we'll link it below. It's kind of like, this would be somebody being blindsided, right? This is like, you're blindsided by this information. This person doesn't want to hang out with you anymore. And the way I kind of look at it is, this makes sense. This kind of conversation makes sense to me if you are in a relationship.
Yeah.
And you're wanting to end it. Whereas I don't think it makes sense is if you're in a friendship and you're wanting to end it. And I think with relationships, for example, I think they have to be quite clear cut whether they're ended or not, because I think the grey area in that is a little bit more harmful. Whereas the grey area with a friendship, I think, is a little bit cloudier. And I think maybe, like somebody said in the comments, like, just let this phase out. Like, don't, you know, and someone had said, oh, someone did this to me and I've never gotten over it. Like a friend did this to me and I've always thought, what's wrong with me? You know, like, what is it that's actually the issue here?
Touching on that then, have you ever ended a friendship, and how? Because obviously you speak about this phased approach. Are you just like phasing out your communication, or are you giving someone a bit of a heads up that it's like, you've pissed me off, and you're kind of phasing down?
Yeah, so I would never slowly ghost somebody.
Yeah.
Like, I think the slowly ghosting somebody and not really kind of owning up to your feelings is a different conversation. I have ended friendships before, and one that particularly stands out to me, I had multiple altercations with this person over the course of a few years, and it was kind of like one of those things of like, one more chance, you know, benefit of the doubt.
A little bit of rope.
Yeah, a little bit of rope. Okay, they're sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, they're sorry again. And then the same kind of pattern reared its head, and I was kind of like, the last time it happened, it was almost like I was just at a boiling point, and I was like, absolutely not. We're not doing this again. And I actually can't do this anymore. This is not benefiting me in any way. And I think that's how I kind of approach friendships as I get older. I think when you're younger, you have more friends because you tolerate things a lot more. Whereas I think when you get older, you're less inclined to tolerate people's shit.
Bullshit.
And it was more of the kind of emotional vampire type of scenario that I often come up with in potential friendships. But I kind of notice those red flags now. So because I'd kind of gone through that when I was younger, and maybe I'd been a bit more tolerant than I should have been in friendships, I now don't let it get to a point where I'm kind of like, oh, I've been friends with this person for 3 years, but I actually don't think I'm that good of friends with them, and I don't know why I'm friends with them. I don't do that anymore. I think that's quite a juvenile way of being.
That's really interesting, actually. I'm really sparking some stuff out this evening. I've never thought of this before. But I haven't thought of that angle before, of when you're younger, maybe you are a bit more tolerant, or maybe patient's not the right word, but maybe you're just like, oh, okay, well, how do I deal with this? Or like, you don't really, again, this is going to sound existential, but maybe you don't know yourself as well. So when you grow up, you're like, actually, I know what I want, I know what I stand for, I know what my boundaries are now. Like, and if you're crossing those, like, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of like, you know, friendships are great. They give you a lot. You know, they help you through bad times. They help you through breakups. Like, that's one of the big things that they help you with. You know, they're there they're a shoulder to cry on. You do lots of activities with them. You know, they know a lot about you, basically. And I think the reason that friendships end is because maybe they're not ticking those boxes. They're not ticking the boxes of, you're not really giving me anything back. I'm kind of feeling like I'm giving you a lot, and maybe I'm giving you a lot of my time. You know, maybe I'm talking from personal experience here, but, you know, that's what we're here for. But like, maybe I'm helping you with your life, or giving you advice on what you should do, and etc., etc. But I don't feel like you're giving me the same back. And I think when that balance is off, that's when friendships don't work, and that's when you have to kind of cut them off. And it is tricky to not ghost somebody in that way, because it is kind of like,
easy, right?
It's ghosting, it's easy. You take out the responsibility of telling that person, look, I don't want to hang out with you anymore. And yeah, I feel like, you know, I'd been in the camp of like, yeah, you should be completely honest and say everything that's on your mind. And then I kind of watched that video and I was like, I would absolutely hate that. I would hate somebody to be like, oh, I just don't think we're good as friends or whatever. Even if I knew that was the case, it's almost like I'd want them to do it slower. I don't know.
I think what's interesting though is like, even in those comments, and we know the internet can be very black and white and everyone's got a lot of thoughts and feelings, is that you got some people saying, I'd be really grateful for this. You've got other people being like, this would ruin my life. And it goes into that thing of, well, how do you do it? How do you end a friendship? And it's so personal to the individual. And there was an article in Elle titled, "We Need to Talk About Our Ex-Best Friends." And this is a quote from it. They say, "In addition to the guilt of letting a decade-long friendship dwindle, I also waited so long to end it because I didn't know how. I literally didn't have the social script. Romantic breakups are an accepted part of life, a rite of passage with familiar rituals, a dramatic haircut, eating ice creams and crying to rom-coms, rebound sex, nights out with your friends. But there's no such formula for dealing with the end of a friendship, no roadmap that recognises the grief of a such rupture and simultaneously assures us that we'll get through it. And having to actually say any version of I don't want to be friends with you anymore feels overly dramatic and even childish." So that goes back to what you were saying in the start of like, we're actually having this conversation, it's not that deep.
Yeah, it's like that I don't want to be friends with you anymore just seems so...
It's like
does seem
juvenile.
so dramatic and kind of like...
Playground.
What do you mean? Like, you don't want to be friends? You know, like when you go up to somebody in the playground as like a 7-year-old, like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. But yeah, I really think the word grief stands out to me because there isn't a playbook for it. You know, there isn't a set of rules of how to get over a friend. And it can be one of those things where maybe you're over it for a few days and then you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I would ask this person for advice on this, but I don't speak to them anymore and I don't know how to deal with that.
Definitely. I think I've had a long-term friendship kind of weave in and out of my life, and every time she's not been there, I have felt like a real big hole in my life, and that's been really, really hard. And I've gone in and out of grieving it and then being angry about it, and then, you know, I was like, I'm gonna get out of my own fucking way on this and just see if we're still cool. And hey presto, we were, and everything's grand and we're back in contact again. And I feel like that kind of hole is healed. But that friendship not being there and there being no like we're done conversation was a bit of a head fuck for me, to be honest.
Yeah, that says something as well, doesn't it? It's like the unsaid business. You're kind of filling in the gaps. Your anxiety is being like, well, they're thinking that this relationship has ended, so therefore this friendship has ended because there's no conversation about it and we're both in the same camp, whereas both of you are probably thinking, oh, maybe we should chat, or maybe we should get back in contact, or like what was with that? Like that was a bit strange, because it's not like a romantic relationship where at the end of those relationships you know why it ended pretty much. Like you're pretty much aware of why it ended, whereas like with friendships there's a little bit more of a grey area and there's not exactly a very clear-cut reason a lot of the time. And that's, I think, why the TikTok is so jarring, because it's like, this is the reason, blah, blah, blah. And someone, you know, claimed that TikTok was quite sociopathic, and I kind of agree with it in a way, because I think even with those friendships that I've maybe cut off, you know, there's still parts about that person that I like, that I would have been, which was the reason that I was friends with them in the first place. Like, there are always reasons why you're friends with somebody. There's always something about that person that you're attracted to or you like. You know, same with relationships. You know, you can look back and be like, what the hell was I doing? But when the bad outweighs the good, then there's an issue.
Definitely. And I think that when you have maybe a friendship that feels like there's unfinished business, or you have both of you go silent, I think you're both left wondering, is it me? Is it them? Are we just answering our own collective question by not talking to each other? And, you know, this friend, when I actually did get back in touch with them, we both had the exact same questions. We were like, what's happened? Do you hate me? Like, you know, that kind of conversation of, we both felt a little bit at a loss as to what had happened. But then sometimes, not necessarily with that friendship, but with others, when there has been a bit of break and there has been a bit of distance, we've come back together and it's been closer than it was before, and we actually just needed a bit of time.
And I think it's kind of like, as you grow older, you realise that your friendships are a little different. And, you know, obviously you're not, you know, with the long-term friendships, you're not going to be the same people that you were when you were in high school, for example. And that's totally fine. And it's kind of navigating whether you can still stay friends and have some a friendship, albeit not similar to what you had before, but something else, and you have to kind of, like a relationship, work on your friendship and work on what you kind of now have in common, or the things that you can do, or the things that you can get out of that friendship. Whereas before, you know, I think people have a real problem because they realize that, you know, friendships in school or whatever, you know, you rely on them wholeheartedly for everything. Whereas, like, as you grow up, you might rely on a partner, or you might rely on a family member, or you might rely on your housemate, and that person, like, becomes a little bit dimmer, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be friends with them anymore. It just means that you need to find a different way to be friends with them.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of growing together that has to happen as well, because there are friends that maybe were there for you in a particular time of your life and you're not in that stage anymore, and there isn't room for that person, or maybe the activities you used to indulge in you just have no interest in anymore. But the other thing you were talking about just then that just sparked something off in my brain was that friendships do take work. Like, sometimes if you want to nurture and keep in touch, like, especially resident long distance friend over here, like, I'm eternally grateful to people who do pick up the phone and who do make the effort and who do make the time, because I know, yeah, Miss Lucy Bell, you are the best, and who get on a flight and come and see me, by the way. But it's obviously not an expectation. Sorry, that made it sound like I was fucking anyone who doesn't is an arsehole.
How dare you not get on a plane right now?
Not at all. I am the troublesome child by moving. But I think you do have to kind of step up, and if it means picking up the phone a bit more or putting a bit of that extra effort in.
That's just life, baby. Like, honestly, you do have to make the effort, and if a friendship is worth it, you make the effort and you will put that time in, no matter how far away that person is. You know, we have access to literally anyone and everything at any point of the day. Like, we can just pick up the phone and call anyone anywhere in the world. And I don't really believe that distance is an excuse to not speak to a friend anymore. And I also think, you know, on the other hand, if you're friends with somebody and it just kind of dwindles and you feel like maybe it's not really going anywhere and you haven't really known them for very long, and, you know, maybe they're not giving you much back, I don't think it warrants you to be like, do you think that our friendship is over? A, yes. B, no.
Like, C, maybe.
C, maybe. You know, I don't think there's always a need for that conversation to happen, because I think it would be clear and very obvious that's happening. However, there is a difference when you have known somebody a long time and you have a kind of shared communication, I think, and you kind of know each other very well. And when that communication starts to break down, or it starts to be something different, and then that person is like, well, what's going on here? Yeah. I think that's a different story. I think then there needs to be a conversation of, is there a problem with the friendship? Is there something that has upset you? Etc., etc. I think you should owe that person the courtesy of having a conversation about it. If it's just a case of personalities, maybe we're just drifting apart, I'm not really that interested in you as a person, and you can kind of tell the other person isn't either, I don't think there needs to be a massive conversation.
Especially if you're not on the same page. I think, yes, it doesn't have to be this sit down scripted, you know, that TikTok video-esque chat. But I think when, you know, there might be one of you who is left totally bewildered, maybe a bit of a, like, you know, a conversational back and forth. But I just want to finish off with another quote from the Forbes article just to wrap up. And they say, what also became clear is that there is a lot of shame and demonizing around ending a friendship. We simply don't have the same compassion or sense of empathy when it happens to someone, despite the profound sense of pain or loss. Given that a friendship can last a long time and be more intimate than our partnerships, when it happens, we can spiral into shame, interpreting it as a personal failure, that we're a bad friend because we couldn't or wouldn't maintain something that was expected to last forever. We worry about judgment from others, especially those in the same friendship circle. This shame causes us to maybe hide our struggles or our sadness. On the flip side, have you had someone ever come to you and be like, you're a shit mate?
No. I've been told when, you know, a friend is not happy with something that I've done. I don't think I've ever been told that I'm a shit friend. Or I've never been told that, you know, someone doesn't want to be friends with me anymore. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I was actually looking at that Elle article, and there was a few quotes from people that she'd interviewed about when a friendship had ended and how they'd felt. And there were things like, it haunts me to this day, is what somebody said. And the words abandoned, betrayed, and devastated came up a lot. And I think I would feel the same if you, for example, you know, I went back to the UK and you kind of sent me a video message like, you know, I just wanted to say we had a really good time together. It was really fun, but I just think, you know, we're quite different and we're going to go in different pathways. You know, I'd be like, what? Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, thanks for the courtesy. Like, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your wisdom on that. Like, I would be like, fucking bitch. Like, the fuck? Like, I wouldn't like
Deletes
that.
text message. No, I'm joking. That message is definitely not
you know,
inbound.
someone put, like, I feel bereaved and angry and confused and hurt. And almost like these words are like even worse than how you would describe a relationship ending. Because at least, like, you know, with maybe a relationship ending, you know, maybe those things that weren't going right or whatever, like, and you know, if you're blindsided by somebody kind of ghosting you or saying they don't want to be friends with you anymore, I think that's a kind of like, well, what's wrong with me as a person?
Yeah, you
know,
got introspective.
You can kind of accept that somebody might not want to be in a relationship with you in a romantic way. You know, that can be a little bit different. Feelings change, etc., etc. It's different to kind of friendship where it's kind of based on your personality. It's based on who you are as a person, and they do know those kind of like deeper sides to you, and maybe they know your most authentic self, and then you're kind of questioning whether your authentic self is good enough and whether you're actually, you know, a likable person. Because I would be questioning that if somebody turned around and said they didn't want to be friends with me anymore.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stuff, though, it's interesting because there's some really quite passionate language in there. Would I feel as strongly if someone just ghosted me? I'm not sure. I think when someone ends it in the way that article is describing, there's nowhere for the mind to wander, I guess. Like, you are, which in some ways is good and in some ways is quite bad, because if someone is outwardly being like, you have done X, Y, Z and you've made me feel X, Y, Z.
Super annoying.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's, where do you go from that?
Yeah, because it seems more hurtful. Like, they would be nitpicking like maybe some of your traits that you have, or I don't know, like,
yeah,
maybe if you hadn't had, you know, it would be even better if you'd had an argument and then you didn't want to be friends with them anymore because of the argument. At least you could be like, okay, it was because of that argument.
Yeah.
And that could be part of it. Whereas like if it's just like a dwindling thing,
yeah,
you know, maybe being honest about it and being like, oh, I just don't really like you anymore, it's just a bit, it's quite hurtful.
And also I think maybe giving a bit of space as well to, like, again, it feels like a romantic thing to say, but like actually maybe work on it a little bit as well, because like if maybe someone has just done one thing that's pissed you off, or you feel like there's a few things where you're like, actually we're not meeting in the middle anymore, I feel like I'm giving 80 and you're giving 20 and this friendship feels off kilter. It feels like, you know, maybe that conversation should come first, or we should be like, oh, you know what, actually mate, like you did this and it upset me, let's talk about it, rather than leaping to this like I no longer have space for you anymore.
I felt that a few times with friendships, and I've been like, oh, I really didn't like what they did, or I didn't like what they said, or I didn't like how they treated that person, and I felt quite angry about it, and like, you know, oh, I don't need them in my life kind of thing, like, you know, and being quite off the handle and flippant about it and being like, oh, I'm just not going to speak to them.
Fly off the handle?
Me? Flying off the handle?
No.
But, you know, maybe a couple of days have gone by and I've calmed down.
Yeah.
And I've kind of assessed, okay, that thing was shitty, but I like this about them, I like this about them, and I like this about them, and this is what they give me as a friend. And I think that's another thing that people have difficulty with, is almost categorizing their friendships. And I say this sounds quite sociopathic, but I think there's different friends give you different things. And that might be, you know, you might go to one friend for advice on relationships and they're really good at that and they're really empathetic and compassionate. And then you might have another friend who's not so empathetic, not so compassionate, that you wouldn't go to for advice, but you'd go and have a great time with, you'd go on holiday with, you go drinking with, you go on a night out with. And then you have somebody who's really into fitness and exercise and they really like that part about you and they go running with you. And, you know, there's lots of different things that you get from different friendships, and you're not going to get the perfect combination of a friend.
I don't think that's sociopathic. I think that's pretty fucking normal. And I think that there will always be friends that are kind of like 360 friends a little bit. Like I'd say there isn't really much I wouldn't come to you about. Classic. Lucy's like, I'm sick of you, leave me alone. But I think that otherwise, yeah, you might have a mate that you go to the gym with who isn't down for that night out. And I think similarly as well, relationship wise, often we look to another half to maybe tick every box. And there might just be some things that you go to friendships over turning to maybe your other half. And I think that is actually a kind of normal, healthy way of looking at it.
In summarization, Phoebe, friendship breakups, are they that deep?
Oh, this is so hard. Okay.
I think they are.
I think they are as well. I think when we have spoken in the past about respective friendship issues, they've taken up a lot of our conversation, and they wouldn't take up that level of conversation if we didn't care. I think it's evident that when it's a friendship that we care deeply about, has maybe been in our lives for a while, we are bothered by it. And I think when a friendship maybe dips or goes cold or someone ghosts, I think it can leave that other person with an awful lot of confusion and a mixed bag of emotions. I think the harder question I'm struggling to answer is, how do you deal with that and how do you end it? Because you are right, turning to someone being like, I don't want to be your mate anymore, feels very like secondary school. It doesn't feel like the right conversation to have. So how do we go about it when someone maybe has upset us, has bothered us, or we have decided in our lives that the boundary we want to draw is, you are no longer in my life and I don't owe you an explanation, which is how a lot of people might view friendship.
Yeah, and not to get like too metaphorical here, but when I was looking at those girls, it was kind of like seeing a bit of a flash of my life in front of me, and my previous life of having like a large group of girlfriends back at home, and
shrunk down.
And now it's quite shrunk down, and maybe I speak to maybe one of those 6 girls, and that person, obviously we're not going to have the same relationship that we had back when I was 13 years old, but that person has been in my life for so long, they are almost at a familial level that I do want to make the effort to maintain that friendship, and I do want to take that with me into the future, and I don't want to lose it, and I don't want to lose it into the void of ghosting. I think there's this tendency for us to just kind of leave our problems at the door and not open them and not deal with it and not say what's on our mind. And sometimes there just needs to be a frank conversation. And I'm not talking about like just being like, oh, I don't really like you as a person, we should end this. I think, maybe having an honest conversation might lead to the fact that you shouldn't speak anymore. But, just going and being like, I'm the one that's doing this, I'm taking the control and I'm ending this friendship.
Yeah, you don't have a choice.
It's kind of like the same thing as a relationship. And I think that's where the sense of betrayal comes from, because it's like, well, maybe you've been here through, people breaking up with me in romantic relationships and, cutting it off at the core, and how much that has affected me. And you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, a bit of a bullet to the heart.
So yes, it's
deep. That deep. I think that's totally fair. And I think the more we've spoken about it and got into it, and the more I realise that, obviously, I don't think it's a shock to anyone when we say friendships are super important. They are really important. One thing in the book at the moment I'm reading is that, I think if you don't have friends, it can be as damaging as obesity and heart disease. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think that it's obviously super important that we have these relationships, cultivate these relationships and care for them. And I think I would really like to see more of friendship breakup content reflected in modern day media.
Yeah, so we're not always kind of like going through these feelings of kind of grief and trauma around a friendship ending on our own. Like, we can talk about it and be like, yeah, I don't know why this person just stopped talking to me and it's really affected me and I don't know why. And like, maybe that person be like, oh, a similar thing happened to me and this was why, and blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of have that kind of relatability. And now it's time for...
And what a pile of bollocks!
This is the time in the show where we chat shit about something really insignificant that just riles us up, fucks us off, makes us mad. So, Phoebe, what are you bringing to the table today?
Sand. Like, also, I love the beach. You know this. I'm a big beachy gal, right? But I think when it comes to go for a swim, you get out,
You're feeling refreshed.
You're feeling refreshed.
Your skin's feeling smooth.
You're feeling good. You've had a nice cool dip in the ocean. You then get out and like you're then covered in sand.
Then you're fighting
the sand
for your life.
You are, and like you then try to reapply your sun cream. And it's like the pure grit of it. Yeah, it's like a really bad exfoliation because you're just taking off like layers of your skin. And it just gets fucking everywhere. But you know why I'm just so conflicted? Because I just love the beach so much. Like, it's my happy place. But that's sand.
Yeah, and it's also like that thing of you're battling with your towel as well.
Yeah.
You come out, you've maybe done your James Bond moment when you've walked out the sea and you're like, I look good, I feel good. And then there's that really like awkward moment where you have to like plonk down on your towel like in a really like unflattering way because you need to make sure you're not getting sand on yourself.
And you just know it's coming, like you know it's going to get stuck to you, then you know you're going to have to probably get in the car and then it's going to get all over the sea.
You're squatting down, you slam down, and then the sand just goes onto you and you're like, well,
it's like, okay. I will say though, I think it's worth it.
It is worth it.
100%
Sand,
worth
is she
it.
worth it? Yes, definitely.
She's worth it.
She's that deep. Thanks so much for listening to Shallow. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a review. It makes a really huge difference in helping others discover the podcast. We always want to hear from you, so feel free to slide into our DMs, send us a bell, or follow us on Instagram at shallowpod, or send us an email at shallow@boxedoff.net. Shallow is a Boxed Off production, written and hosted by Lucy Bell and Phoebe Whittle. We'll see you next time.